It was Tuesday, the 18th of July, 1911, in the village of Longcross, Surrey, England. The morning broke warm and still. Along the narrow lanes that threaded between cottages, the air hung heavy with the scent of turned earth and wild hedgerow. On the common ground that stretched westward toward Chobham, bracken grew thick and untended, and in the hollow places where rainwater gathered, children had for years gone paddling in summer. Amy Margaret Reeves, 10 years of age, remained at home that morning to assist her elder sister with the household duties. Their mother had died the previous winter, just before Christmas in 1910, and the children had learned to manage the chores without complaint. Amy swept the front step, folded linen, and carried water from the pump. By noon she had finished. She went into the garden briefly, then returned indoors for a piece of bread and butter. At 12:30, she said goodbye to her sister Ethel and made her way across the common toward the school, where afternoon lessons were to begin. Ethel watched her go. The girl walked steadily, her boots visible among the long grass, her figure growing smaller as she moved toward the far side of the open ground. It was the last time Amy was seen alive. The school day ended promptly at 4 o'clock. Children emerged in groups, their voices carrying across the lanes as they made their way homeward. But Amy Margaret Reeves did not return. By evening, her absence had become a matter of concern. By nightfall, it had become a matter of search. The Reeves family lived in modest circumstances at Longcross, a hamlet some 20 miles west of central London. Mr. Arthur Reeves worked as a gardener at the Royal Holloway Sanatorium in Egham, 5 miles distant. The position provided steady employment, though the wages were small and the family lived without comforts. When Mrs. Esther Reeves died in December of 1910, the household became quieter still. The eldest daughter, Ethel, assumed the duties of managing the home. The younger children attended the local school and learned their letters and their sums, and the domestic subjects thought proper for children of their station. That Tuesday morning, Menin had remained behind while her siblings walked to school. She helped Ethel with the washing and the sweeping. At some point before noon, a neighbour boy named Albert Henry Hampton appeared in the garden. He was 15 years of age and lived with his aunt and uncle in the cottage next door, though his parents resided in Chobham. Albert and Amy knew one another well. They had attended school together in years past. That morning they built a small fire in the garden, placed bricks around it, and boiled water in a tin pot. It was a common enough pastime for children in summer. At 12:30, Amy went indoors, took a piece of bread and butter, and told her sister she was leaving for school. Ethel watched her walk across the common. The grass was dry and the sky was clear. Nothing seemed amiss. Between 2 o'clock and 1:30, Ethel saw Albert Hampton again. He walked up the garden path and paused near the door. He seemed uncertain, as though he wished to speak but did not know how to begin. He asked whether she was still working. He mentioned that he had been asleep beneath an apple tree. He said he was going to his aunt's cottage to borrow some tea. He carried a stick, freshly cut, the bark still pale where it had been severed from the branch. Ethel thought nothing of it. Albert often carried sticks. Boys did. He returned some 30 minutes later and made a light remark about helping with the potato patch. There was no mention of Amy. Ethel assumed her sister had returned to school. The afternoon passed without incident. The sun moved westward. Shadows lengthened across the common. At 4 o'clock, the school dismissed its pupils. Children walked home in clusters, their voices bright in the still air. Some stopped to play in the fields. Others hurried toward their cottages, eager for supper. But Amy Margaret Reeves was not among them. When the usual hour for her return had passed, Ethel went outside and made her way to the spots where local children often gathered. She asked those playing in the field, whether they had seen her sister. The reply was unexpected. Amy had not attended school that afternoon. The word settled over Ethel like a weight. What had begun as mild concern became something heavier. The realization came slowly and then all at once. Amy was not merely late. Amy was missing. Mr. Arthur Reeves arrived home at 8:30 that evening. He had walked the 5 miles from Egham, as he did each day, carrying his tools and thinking of the supper that awaited him. Instead, he was met by his eldest daughter, who told him that Amy had not come home. For a moment, he stood in the doorway and said nothing. The words did not seem real. Amy was a quiet child, dependable, never one to stray far or cause alarm. He set down his tools. He asked where she had last been seen. Ethel replied that she had left the house at 12:30 and walked across the common toward the school. Mr. Reeves immediately began asking the neighbours whether they had seen her. None had. He gathered a group of local residents. Together they set out with lanterns in hand. They searched the village lanes, the woods, the uneven ground of the common. They looked in ditches and behind hedgerows and along every path. The darkness made the work slow. Each minute that passed increased their anxiety. At approximately 10 o'clock that evening, Mr. Arthur Reeves approached a small pond on Chobham Common, some 400 yards from the family home. The spot was known locally as the Dipping Hole, a place where children sometimes went paddling in summer. On the bank, he saw a pair of shoes and some stockings neatly placed, as though a child had removed them before stepping into the water. And there, face down in the shallow water, her head among the weeds, was Amy. He pulled her from the pond, hoping desperately for some sign of life. Mr. Reeves laid his daughter on the bank and called out for help. Others from the search party arrived within moments. A lantern was brought forward. In the flickering light, they saw what deepened their horror. There were bruises and wounds upon the child's head. The grass around the edge of the pond was trampled and disturbed. It was clear to those present that she had not simply fallen in. Word was sent to the authorities. Police officers and a doctor arrived at the scene. By the time midnight had passed, the small body had been carried to the mortuary at Chertsey. The constabulary began their examination of the common in the early hours of the morning. The pond itself was small, no more than 11 feet by 10, holding perhaps 9 inches of water above another 9 inches of mud and thick weeds. Tin cans and other rubbish lay on the bottom where people had thrown them. It was a muddy hollow, tucked among the bracken, familiar to all the local children. Superintendent Mears examined the scene with care. He noted the location of the shoes and stockings. He observed the wounds upon the child's head. In the middle of the pond, he saw a stick protruding slightly from the water. He retrieved it. It was a birch branch, approximately 2 feet in length, and embedded in the bark were several strands of long, light brown hair. The hair appeared to be human. Superintendent Mears walked across the common and cut a branch from a nearby birch tree. When he returned, he compared the two. They looked very similar. Both had been freshly cut. Further searching led Inspector Pike to a woodshed behind the cottage where Albert Hampton's aunt and uncle resided, next door to the Reeves household. Inside, leaning against the wall, was a wood chopper. Leaves clung to its blade. The leaves, he noted, matched those found around the pond where Amy's body had been discovered. As word spread throughout Longcross, fear and sorrow settled over the village. What had happened to the child? Who had done this? The constabulary worked through the night, gathering evidence, questioning those who lived nearby, and examining every detail of the scene. By dawn they had made an arrest. A local boy, 15 years of age, was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. Dr. George Hodgson, the police surgeon, conducted the post-mortem examination at Chertsey Mortuary on the 19th of July. He was assisted by Dr. Viney. The examination was thorough and methodical. Dr. Hodgson observed that the girl's face was pale. Her tongue protruded slightly between clenched teeth. Her hands were still grasping water weeds. There was mud in her mouth, on her teeth, and on the right side of her face and head. Upon closer examination, Dr. Hodgson found no marks upon the body itself, but there were bruises and scratches upon the legs. On her head there were 4 distinct wounds. One was located above the right eyebrow and was severe enough to expose the bone beneath. Another was found on the back of her head, measuring approximately 2½ inches in length. A third was lacerated across her forehead. A fourth was located at the base of her skull. In Dr. Hodgson's opinion, these wounds would have stunned the child, but were not by themselves fatal. He stated that it would have been very difficult to receive such injuries by simply falling into the pond. He suggested that a blunt instrument, such as a stick, could have caused the wounds. The cause of death, he concluded, was drowning. The evidence was examined and catalogued. The birch stick found in the pond was sealed and set aside. Samples of the hair embedded in the bark were taken for further analysis. Professor Pepper, a forensic expert from the Home Office, was called to examine the stick and the hair. He confirmed that the hair strands were light brown and consistent with Amy's hair colour. In his opinion, the girl had likely been standing in the pond when someone struck her with several blows in quick succession. The force of the attack had caused her to fall into the water, where she drowned. The police continued their inquiries throughout the district. Witnesses were questioned, statements were recorded. A man named William Scammell, a painter from Egham, came forward to say that he had been in Longcross on the 18th of July looking for work. He had stopped at the Reeves house at approximately 20 minutes to 2 in the afternoon and asked for a glass of water. He had seen Miss Ethel Reeves. He had then cycled to a house being built opposite Longcross Hill, was turned away and headed back toward Egham. He saw only a few people on the road. The inquest into Amy's death commenced on Wednesday, the 19th of July, at Chertsey Town Hall. Albert Henry Hampton, 15 years of age, sat in the dock. He was a familiar face to many present, having grown up in Longcross and attended the local school. When the proceedings began, Superintendent Mears stepped forward to announce that the hearing would be conducted in accordance with the Children Act of 1908. As a result, members of the public were required to leave the courtroom. There were murmurs of surprise and disappointment, but the ruling was upheld. Albert Hampton appeared unmoved. It was unclear whether he fully understood the significance of the proceedings. The evidence was presented methodically. Superintendent Mears described the scene at the pond. He showed the jury the birch stick with the strands of hair embedded in the bark. Ethel Reeves gave her testimony, though she fainted while speaking, and the proceedings were paused. When she recovered, she stated that she had seen Albert Hampton in the garden with Amy that morning. She said they had made a small fire together. She added that Albert had returned later in the afternoon carrying a stick and had spoken to her briefly. She had not seen Amy after 12:30. Mrs. Martha Stevens, Albert Hampton's aunt, testified that her nephew had visited her on the 18th of July and said he was looking for work. She described him as gentle by nature and noted that he had never shown any sign of bad temper. She insisted that he had always been friendly with Amy and her brothers. The coroner summarized the evidence for the jury. He noted that the only physical link between Albert Hampton and the death was the birch stick with human hair found near the body. He pointed out inconsistencies in the boy's statements about his whereabouts, but also noted that Albert had openly mentioned carrying a stick, which seemed unlikely behavior for someone attempting to conceal guilt. He reminded the jury that there appeared to be no motive. Albert Hampton was friendly with the Reeves family. There was no sign of indecent assault. The evidence was circumstantial. After deliberating for 25 minutes, the jury returned. The foreman delivered the verdict. Despite the verdict, Albert Hampton was not altogether free. He remained under arrest and was returned to Brixton Prison while the investigation continued. The following day, he was released after bail of £25 was paid. On Friday, the 4th of August, 1911, following further police inquiries, Albert Henry Hampton was formally discharged. The constabulary continued to investigate, conducting surveillance and interviewing potential witnesses across the district. They found nothing. The investigation reached a dead end. The lack of concrete evidence and the elusive nature of the crime made progress impossible. The case remained open, but as the months turned into years, the chance of solving it diminished. The newspapers carried reports of the case for several weeks. Headlines spoke of the tragedy at Long Cross, the mysterious death of a child, the inability of the authorities to bring the perpetrator to justice. Public opinion was divided. Some believed Albert Hampton was guilty, but that the evidence had been insufficient. Others believed he was innocent and that the true killer had escaped detection entirely. Still others suggested that a stranger had been responsible, a man passing through the district who had committed the crime and vanished before he could be apprehended. Albert Hampton remained in Surrey, though his life was now overshadowed by suspicion. In the years that followed, as Europe descended into war, he enlisted in the British Army. He joined the 4th Hussars and was deployed with the British Expeditionary Force. On the 7th of July, 1917, he was wounded in action, both legs injured, the right one more seriously. For his bravery, he was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. The recognition marked a turning point. The soldier, once shadowed by whispers and doubts, had through his actions in war reclaimed his reputation. He earned respect and admiration on the battlefield rather than suspicion in civil life. No one else was ever tried for the murder of 10-year-old Amy Margaret Reeves. What actually happened to her on Tuesday, the 18th of July, 1911, is not known. The case remains officially unsolved. Years later, the name was spoken only in brief. The common grew over, the dipping hole filled with silt and weeds, and was eventually forgotten by all but the oldest residents of Long Cross. The file remains in the records office at Chertsey, bound in dust and tied with ribbon. Inside are the statements of witnesses, the findings of doctors, the conclusions of the coroner. The words are faded now, the ink pale, the paper brittle. But the story they tell is clear. A child went out one summer afternoon and did not return, and no one ever knew why.